I've known Andy and Ernie a long time, and, well, I'm just proud to be a friend of theirs. They're great guys, they make some great music, and that's what they're about to do now.
For decades, America believed it already knew everything about the friendship between Don Knotts and Andy Griffith, two men whose chemistry on The Andy Griffith Show felt so natural, so effortless that fans assumed their bond behind the scenes was just as simple. But what most people never realized is that Don carried a very different version of their story. A version he rarely spoke aloud until the final years of his life. And when he finally revealed it, those closest to him said it changed the way they looked at Andy Griffith forever. Don Knotts was known for his humor, his gentle spirit, and his gift for making people laugh even during their darkest moments. But near the end, he began sharing memories he had kept locked away for more than 4 decades, stories of tension, heartbreak, jealousy, loyalty, and a truth about Andy that he believed needed to be understood before he was gone. These weren't bitter confessions or accusations. They were heartfelt reflections from a man who spent years hiding how deeply his relationship with Andy had shaped him, both as an actor and as a human being. What Don finally admitted shocked even those who thought they knew him best. Because behind the jokes, behind the cameras, and behind the small-town charm of Mayberry, there was a truth he believed the world was finally ready to hear. When Don Knotts first joined The Andy Griffith Show, few people understood just how transformative the partnership between him and Andy Griffith would become. To the audience, Andy was the calm, steady center of Mayberry, while Don, as the high-strung and lovable Barney Fife, brought the spark that turned every episode into something unforgettable. Their chemistry was instantaneous, but according to Don's later reflections, it wasn't effortless at all. It grew from a complicated bond built on admiration, competition, and a deep understanding of one another's strengths and insecurities. Don often said that Andy was one of the most gifted performers he had ever met, someone who could shift from comedy to sincerity without ever losing control of the scene. But what many didn't know was that Andy initially planned for the show to revolve entirely around himself. Don revealed that the original concept for Mayberry had very little room for a second major comedic presence. Andy saw himself as the central funny man, and the network supported that vision. It wasn't until Don stepped into the role and delivered that first unforgettable performance as Barney Fife that everything changed. Don later recalled with a smile that Andy had to make a choice: cling to the spotlight, or let the show evolve into something far better than either of them expected. He chose the latter, but not without hesitation. Don's final conversations revealed that Andy struggled more than people realized with the idea of sharing comedic control of the show. Andy admired Don immensely, but admiration didn't erase the pressure he felt. Don described moments when Andy grew frustrated, not with him as a person, but with the fact that Don's brilliance forced the show in a direction Andy never originally imagined. Fans saw two men laughing together, improvising flawlessly, but behind the scenes, Don sensed Andy's internal battle between pride and generosity. And it was that battle, Don believed, that shaped their entire working relationship. Still, Don always insisted Andy wasn't jealous in a petty or mean-spirited way. Instead, he said Andy had a strong sense of authorship over Mayberry. Andy wanted the show to be perfect, and that meant maintaining control even when Don's performances began stealing scenes and transforming the tone of the entire production. Don remembered times when Andy pulled him aside after a run-through, not to criticize, but to carefully recalibrate the comedic balance. Don said these moments weren't confrontational. They were reminders that Andy felt a deep responsibility to the show's direction, perhaps deeper than anyone else involved. And Don respected that more than he ever admitted publicly. What made their relationship even more complicated was Don's overwhelming respect for Andy. Don saw Andy as the steady anchor he himself never felt he could be. Don had always wrestled with anxiety and self-doubt, something he hid behind humor and nervous energy. Andy, in contrast, appeared unshakable. Don said Andy's calm presence sometimes intimidated him, making him feel like he had to push even harder to prove his worth. Yet Andy's steadiness was also what made Don feel safe enough to experiment, fail, and succeed. It was a strange emotional mix: admiration, insecurity, and genuine affection all weighed together. By the time Doan left the show after 5 seasons, the public was told it was simply a contract issue. But Don's final reflections revealed a more personal truth. He believed Andy was disappointed when he left. Not because Doan abandoned the show, but because Andy felt their partnership was something rare that would never be recreated. Doan admitted that both men were too proud to say it at the time. They parted ways professionally while carrying unspoken gratitude and unresolved tension. Years later, when Doan looked back on those days, he finally acknowledged that their friendship was never simple. It was layered, emotional, and built on a foundation of respect that neither fully expressed until much later in life. And according to Doan, that complexity was exactly what made their connection and the truth behind it worth sharing. As Doan Knotts opened up during his final years, he spoke openly about something fans never imagined. Despite the laughter on screen, the atmosphere behind the cameras was far more complicated than the public ever knew. Doan insisted that he and Andy Griffith never had a falling out, but he admitted that tension and sometimes outright conflict shaped much of their time working together. It was not anger or resentment, but the weight of expectations placed on both men. Expectations that grew heavier as the show became a national sensation. Doan revealed that the early success of The Andy Griffith Show took everyone by surprise. Andy had envisioned a gentle, slow-paced comedy with homespun charm, but as Barney Fife caught on with audiences, the entire rhythm of the show shifted. Executives pushed for more Barney-centered episodes, and fans demanded more of the chaotic, emotional outbursts that defined Don's character. Doan later said he sometimes felt guilty about the way the narrative drifted away from Andy's original vision. He sensed Andy's frustration, not as anger toward him, but as disappointment in losing control of the show's tone. Andy had wanted a quiet, reflective series. Instead, the show became one of television's greatest comedic partnerships, something beautiful, but something Andy hadn't planned for. According to Doan, Andy handled it with far more grace than people realized. But there were moments when Andy pulled back emotionally, needing to recenter himself. Doan recalled times when Andy stepped off the set, needing space before filming a particularly demanding comedic scene. Andy wasn't upset with Doan. He was simply recalibrating. Doan admired that Andy always understood when something was overwhelming, something Doan himself struggled to recognize in his own life. Doan admitted that Andy's emotional distance puzzled him at first, but over time he learned it was Andy's way of protecting both himself and the show. What Doan finally confessed, though, was something far more personal. He sometimes felt overshadowed by Andy in ways audiences could never see. Doan was undeniably the show's breakout comedic star, but he was also aware that their dynamic depended on Andy's stability. Without Andy's calm, level-headed presence, Barney Fife's frantic charm wouldn't have worked. Doan said that Andy knew his value. He knew that his stillness allowed Doan to soar. But Andy rarely said it aloud, and Doan spent years wondering whether his talent was appreciated or merely tolerated. Later in life, Doan learned the truth. Cast members told him that Andy often defended him behind closed doors, fighting to protect Don's creative freedom, pushing back against producers who wanted to tone him down, and insisting that Doan be given space to perform the kind of physical comedy that became legendary. Doan admitted he never fully understood how deeply Andy supported him until decades later, when stories from crew members finally reached him. It was only then that Doan realized their behind-the-scenes tension had never been about rivalry. It had been about pressure. The pressure for Andy to guide the show. The pressure for Doan to deliver perfection. The pressure of knowing millions of people were watching every move. Doan also revealed something bittersweet. Andy was not always easy to read. He could be warm, generous, and funny during lunch breaks, then suddenly turn quiet and introspective the moment cameras started rolling again. Doan knew Andy wasn't cold. He simply carried the weight of leadership in a way Doan never could. Andy made the tough decisions, handled network demands, and took responsibility for the show's long-term direction. Doan said Andy bore that burden silently, sometimes too silently, which made him seem distant when he was really just overwhelmed. Despite everything, despite the tension, the misunderstandings, and the emotional distance, Doan always insisted Andy Griffith was one of the most loyal friends he ever had. He said their relationship was like two pieces of a puzzle. Imperfect alone, unforgettable together. The truth behind their dynamic wasn't one of feuds or jealousy. It was the story of two men trying to navigate success neither expected, carrying pressures neither fully understood, and creating something magical in the process. When Don Knotts made the decision to leave The Andy Griffith Show after 5 unforgettable seasons, fans were never given the full truth behind his departure. The official reason was simple. Don had been offered a long-term film contract he couldn't refuse. But in his final years, Don admitted the real story was far more emotional and far more painful than anyone outside the cast ever understood. According to Don, leaving the show felt like walking away from a family he wasn't ready to lose. And Andy's reaction to his departure revealed a truth he carried with him for the rest of his life. Don said the hardest part was realizing that Andy believed he would stay until the very end of the series. Andy had quietly assumed Don would renew his contract, and Don assumed they would discuss the future openly when the time came. Instead, a misunderstanding from the network created confusion. Don was told Andy planned to continue the show for several more years without him, while Andy later admitted he believed Don was eager to move on. That miscommunication, one neither man fully cleared up at the time, became one of the deepest regrets. Don carried. When Don broke the news, Andy was blindsided. Don described the moment as one of the most emotional conversations of his career. Andy didn't get angry, but he withdrew, becoming quieter than Don had ever seen him. Don said Andy's silence hurt more than any argument could have. He realized then how much Andy valued him not just as a co-star, but as a partner who balanced the entire heart of Mayberry. Don revealed that Andy once told a colleague that losing Don felt like losing a limb, a comment Don never knew about until decades later. Don admitted that Andy's response haunted him for years. He wondered whether Andy had felt abandoned or whether he believed Don left for fame or money. Don always insisted that wasn't true. He left because he believed he had no other option. He was told the show would continue indefinitely without any guarantee of his place in it. And for a man with a family and a career still uncertain, the film contract offered stability. But Don said he wished he had spoken more honestly to Andy, wished he had asked face-to-face whether Andy wanted him to stay. After Don's departure, the show shifted dramatically. Viewers immediately noticed something was missing, something that even Andy struggled to replace. Don later learned through cast members that Andy often felt the absence deeply. Though he publicly supported the show's evolution, in private he expressed that the magic spark simply wasn't the same. Don said he never wanted Andy to feel that loss, and hearing that later in life gave him a mix of pride and sadness. Years passed before Don and Andy finally addressed the emotional gap between them. Don shared that during a reunion years later, Andy approached him with a sincerity Don had always hoped for. Andy told him, "We made something nobody else could have made." And Don admitted those words healed a wound he had carried quietly for almost 20 years. That conversation, Don said, was when he realized Andy had never resented him, not for leaving, not for succeeding, not for stepping away from Mayberry. Andy simply missed him. Near the end of his life, Don spoke fondly about that reconciliation. He said their friendship matured after the show in ways it never could have during those early years of pressure and uncertainty. They became more honest, more relaxed, and more appreciative of one another. Don understood then that their bond was never broken. It had simply been reshaped by time, distance, and misunderstanding. For Don, the truth was clear. His departure had hurt both of them, but it had also proven the depth of their connection. And in his last reflections, Don wanted people to know that the story wasn't one of betrayal, it was one of two men learning. Too late, just how much they meant to each other. In the last months of his life, Don Knotts began opening up in ways he never had before. Surrounded by family and close friends, he finally felt ready to share the truths he had carried quietly for decades, truths about his own insecurities. The weight of fame, the joys of Mayberry, and most importantly, the man who stood beside him through it all, Andy Griffith. Don's final reflections weren't bitter confessions or dramatic accusations. Instead, they were gentle, honest realizations he hoped would help fans understand the real story behind a partnership that shaped television history. One of the most surprising, things Doan revealed was how deeply Andy influenced his life outside the show. Doan admitted that Andy's calm, steady personality grounded him during moments when anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. Doan lived his life with an inner nervousness few people ever saw, and Andy often served as a quiet anchor. Doan said Andy never lectured or offered long speeches. Instead, he supported him simply by being present, steady, patient, and unwavering. Doan confessed that he didn't recognize the importance of that support until many years later. Long after the show had ended, Doan also revealed that he wished he had expressed more gratitude to Andy while they were young. He said it was easy, back in those busy production years, to get swept up in schedules, scripts, and the pressure of performing. The two men communicated through work, through timing, through instinct. But emotional truth, the words that mattered, were often left unsaid. Doan believed men of their generation were taught to be quiet about feelings. And, as a result, both he and Andy held back words they needed to share. Doan admitted he regretted that silence more than anything else. As his health declined, Doan spoke often about the day he learned Andy had praised him privately throughout the years. Crew members told Doan stories of Andy defending him when producers wanted safer jokes, simpler scenes, or toned-down performances. Andy saw Doan's potential long before the world did, and he made sure Doan had the space to shine. Doan said hearing that truth late in life moved him deeply. It was the confirmation he never knew he needed. Proof that Andy valued him far more than he ever realized. Doan also shared something even more emotional. Andy visited him during his final days. The two men sat together quietly, without scripts, without cameras, without the pressure that once surrounded their every move. Doan recalled how Andy held his hand and told him he was proud of everything they had created together. Andy thanked him for the laughs, for the heart, for bringing Barney Fife to life in a way no one else ever could. Doan said Andy's words gave him a peace he hadn't felt in years. During these last conversations, Doan finally expressed the gratitude he had kept inside for so long. He told Andy that their partnership saved him, not just professionally, but personally. He said Andy's presence gave him strength during some of the most uncertain moments of his early career. Doan wanted Andy to know that his kindness, his faith, and his steady support meant far more than fans ever imagined. In the end, Doan's final truth was simple but powerful. Andy Griffith was not just a co-star or a friend. He was the person who shaped Doan's life in ways he only fully understood when looking back on everything they had endured together. Doan believed the world needed to hear this, not because Andy demanded praise, but because Doan felt people deserved to know that the heart of Mayberry wasn't just television magic. It was built on the real, complicated, imperfect, and deeply human friendship between two men who found something rare in each other. Doan Knotts passed away knowing that the truth had finally been spoken, a truth about love, loyalty, regret, and reconciliation. And in sharing it before his death, he ensured that the legacy of Andy Griffith would forever be tied, not just to Mayberry, but to the quiet, profound bond that defined both of their lives.